The cold came first, not gradually, the way summer heat builds through an afternoon, but all at once, a physical thing that wrapped around Clara Whitmore's chest and squeezed. She'd thought she understood winter. Boston had winters. Boston had snow that piled against the brownstones on Beacon Hill, ice that made the cobblestones treacherous, wind that cut through even the finest wool coats her father's money could buy. This wasn't that. This was something else entirely, something that wanted her dead. Clara sat on her trunk beside the frozen road, surrounded by her belongings like a shipwreck survivor clinging to debris. 2 more trunks. A hat box that had already blown open, scattering bonnets across the snow. A carpet bag with her teaching books inside, the leather already stiff with frost. The stagecoach that had dumped her here 3 hours ago was long gone. Just a memory now, along with the warmth of other bodies pressed together in that miserable box on wheels. 5 miles to Black Hollow, the driver had said, not meeting her eyes. Road's too rough with all this weight. You'll have to walk it. She'd tried to argue, tried to explain that she was expected, that she was the new schoolteacher, that surely they could make room, but the other passengers had already been complaining, too crowded, too slow, too much cargo. And when the driver started unloading her trunks onto the snow-packed road, nobody said a word in her defense. The stagecoach had lurched away, wheels grinding through ice, leaving her standing there with her mouth still open on an unfinished sentence. That had been mid-afternoon when the sun was still a pale disk behind the clouds. Now it was getting dark. Clara pulled her coat tighter, but it didn't help. The cold wasn't something you could keep out with fabric. It found every gap, every opening, worked its way through wool and cotton and silk until it reached your skin. Then it kept going, sinking into muscle, settling into bone. Her hands had stopped hurting about 20 minutes ago. That seemed like it should be good news, except she remembered reading something once about frostbite, how the pain went away right before the damage became permanent. She looked down at her fingers. They were white. Not the healthy pink white of cold skin, but a waxy dead white that made her stomach turn. "Get up," she said out loud. Her voice sounded strange in the emptiness. Small. The wind took it and scattered it across the prairie like it was nothing. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate properly. They felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. She managed to get halfway up before her knee buckled, and she sat down hard on the trunk again. The impact jarred her teeth together. She tasted blood. "Get up." This time she made it to her feet, swaying. The world tilted sideways for a moment before righting itself. She took one step forward, then another. Her boots crunched through the top layer of snow. Underneath was ice. The kind of ice that had been forming and melting and reforming for weeks, building up in layers like geological strata. She made it 10 steps before she had to stop. Her lungs burned. Each breath felt like swallowing knives. The road stretched ahead of her, disappearing into the gathering darkness. 5 miles. The driver had said 5 miles. She'd walked 5 miles before, back home in Boston. Along the river, on pleasant spring afternoons, with her sister chattering beside her about some boy, or some dress, or some piece of gossip that seemed desperately important at the time. This wasn't that either. She turned around, looked back at her trunk sitting in the snow. 20 steps. She'd managed 20 steps, and already she could barely see them in the dimness. If she kept walking, she'd have to leave everything behind. All her clothes, her books, her teaching supplies, everything she'd brought to start her new life in Wyoming territory. If she stayed with her belongings, she'd freeze to death before morning. The wind picked up, and somewhere in the distance something howled. Clara's heart stuttered in her chest. She'd read about wolves in books, studied them academically, the way she'd studied geography and mathematics and classical literature. She knew they were canines, that they hunted in packs, that they were generally afraid of humans. Generally. The howl came again, closer this time. Or maybe it was just the wind playing tricks. She couldn't tell anymore. Her ears felt stuffed with cotton, and there was a strange ringing sound that wouldn't go away. "You're Clara Whitmore," she said to the darkness. "You speak 3 languages. You've read every book in your father's library. You're not going to die on a road in Wyoming because some stagecoach driver was too lazy to carry your luggage." The words should have been inspiring, empowering. Instead, they just sounded pathetic. She looked down at her hands again, still white, still waxy. She tried to make a fist, but her fingers barely moved. A new kind of fear crept in then, colder than the wind. This wasn't the sharp, immediate terror of wolves or darkness. This was something slower, The quiet understanding that she'd made a terrible mistake, and now it was too late to fix it. She shouldn't have come here. She should have stayed in Boston, should have married Richard Thornton like her father wanted. Richard, with his banking fortune and his proper family, and his complete and utter inability to see her as anything other than an ornament for his eventual mansion. "You're throwing your life away," her father had said when she'd announced her decision to take the teaching position. "For what? To educate farmers' children in some godforsaken wilderness? To matter," she'd shot back. "To do something more than sit in a parlor and embroider pillowcases." He'd stared at her like she'd spoken in tongues. In his world, the world of Boston society, of inherited wealth and careful marriages, women didn't need to matter. They needed to be beautiful and accomplished and marriageable. Her intelligence was meant to be decorative, like knowing enough French to read a menu or enough piano to entertain guests after dinner. The idea that she might want to use her education for something real had genuinely confused him. "You'll regret this," he'd said finally. "When you're struggling in poverty, breaking your back to survive, you'll wish you'd listened to me." She'd left anyway, taken the train west with her head high and her convictions firm. She was going to be different. She was going to prove that a woman could be more than what society expected. Now she was going to freeze to death 5 miles from nowhere, and her father would never even know what happened to her. Clara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, trying to clear it, but the world stayed fuzzy around the edges. The darkness was getting thicker, pressing in from all sides. She needed to move, needed to walk, needed to... Her legs gave out. She didn't feel herself fall. One moment she was standing, the next she was on her knees in the snow, the cold seeping through her skirts like water. "Get up," she whispered, but her body didn't listen. The exhaustion hit her all at once. Not just physical tiredness, but something deeper. A bone-deep weariness that made her want to curl up and sleep. Just for a few minutes. Just long enough to rest. She knew that was dangerous. Knew that falling asleep in the cold was how people died. But knowing something and caring about it were two different things, and right now all she wanted was to close her eyes. The snow under her cheek felt almost soft. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice was screaming at her to get up, to fight, to keep trying. But that voice was getting quieter, fading into the background noise of wind and darkness. She thought about her sister Caroline, sweet Caroline who'd cried when Clara left, who'd begged her to reconsider. Carolyn would be getting married next spring, to a lawyer from a good family. She'd have a big wedding and a nice house and probably 4 or 5 children who would call Clara Aunt Clara on the rare occasions they bothered to write. If Clara had stayed, she could have been there for it, could have helped plan the wedding, been the maid of honor, taught her future nieces and nephews to read. Instead, she was dying alone in Wyoming. The wolves howled again, definitely closer this time. Clara tried to be afraid, but she couldn't quite manage it. The fear was still there, somewhere, but it felt distant now, muffled, like it was happening to someone else. Her eyes drifted closed. The cold woke her, not the general cold that had been slowly killing her for the past several hours, but a sudden, sharp cold that felt like being slapped. She gasped, her eyes flying open, and found herself staring up at a sky full of stars. No, not just stars. Those were too bright, too close. They were lantern light. Someone was standing over her, holding a lantern, and even though she couldn't make out his face through her blurred vision, she could hear him cursing. "Jesus Christ," the voice said, male, rough. "How long have you been out here?" Clara tried to answer, but her jaw wouldn't work properly. Her teeth were chattering too hard. "Don't try to talk." The lantern swung away, and she heard footsteps crunching through snow. More cursing. Then the footsteps came back, and suddenly there were hands on her, rough, calloused hands that pulled her upright like she weighed nothing. She wanted to protest, wanted to explain about her trunks, her books, her teaching supplies. But her tongue felt thick and useless in her mouth. "Your luggage isn't worth dying for," the voice said, as if reading her mind. "We'll come back for it in the morning, if you're still alive in the morning." That should have been frightening, but Clara couldn't quite process it. Everything felt dreamlike, distant. She was being lifted now, carried, her body flopping against someone's chest like a rag doll. "Stay awake," the voice commanded. "You hear me? Don't you dare fall asleep." But sleep sounded wonderful. Sleep sounded like the best idea anyone had ever had. I said stay awake! The voice was sharper now, almost angry. Something shook her, hard enough to rattle her bones. Talk to me. Tell me your name. Clara, she managed, though it came out as barely a whisper. Clara what? Whitmore. Where are you from, Clara Whitmore? Boston. A snort. Of course you are. What the hell is a Boston girl doing freezing to death in Wyoming? Teaching, she mumbled. Teaching what? School, Black Hollow, new teacher. There was a pause. Then, you're the school teacher? The one the town council hired? She tried to nod, but her head just lolled sideways. Well, Miss Whitmore, you've got spectacularly bad timing. Worst storm of the season supposed to hit tomorrow. Clara wanted to point out that she hadn't exactly planned to be abandoned on a frozen road, but forming the words took too much energy. Instead, she let her eyes close again. No. The voice was right by her ear now, loud and insistent. No sleeping. I've got questions for you, and you're going to answer them. How old are you? 19. 19. Christ, you got family back in Boston? Father, sister. They know you're out here. Father doesn't approve. Smart man. That stung, even through the fog. Clara forced her eyes open, tried to focus on the face above her. All she could make out was a dark silhouette against the stars. Not smart, she said. Controlling. Is that why you ran away? To escape Daddy's rules? Didn't run. Left. Different. If you say so. She was in a wagon now. She didn't remember being put there, but suddenly there was wood underneath her instead of arms, and something heavy and warm was being draped over her body. A blanket, several blankets. You're lucky I found you, the voice said from somewhere nearby. I wasn't even supposed to be on this road. One of my steers broke through a fence, led me on a damn chase halfway across the territory. Lucky, Clara repeated. The word felt wrong in her mouth. Nothing about this felt lucky. Compared to freezing to death? Yeah, lucky. The wagon lurched into motion. Clara's body slid sideways until she hit something solid. Another body, warm and alive, sitting next to her. How far? She asked. My place? 3 miles. Town's another 2 past that, but you're not making it to town tonight. Need to school tomorrow. The school's been empty for 2 years. Another day won't kill anyone. Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled her under before she could form the words. She woke to pain. Not the distant, fuzzy pain of frostbite, but sharp, immediate agony that radiated from her hands and feet like fire. She gasped, tried to pull away from it, and felt hands push her back down. I know it hurts, a voice said, the same rough voice from before. But it's a good sign. Means the blood's coming back. Clara opened her eyes. She was inside now, lying on something soft. A bed, she realized, though not a very comfortable one. The room around her was small and spare. Rough wooden walls, a single window showing darkness outside, a pot-bellied stove in the corner radiating heat. And standing beside the bed, looking down at her with an expression somewhere between concern and irritation, was the man who'd saved her life. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 30, give or take a few years, tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He was handsome in a harsh sort of way, all sharp angles and hard edges, with eyes that were studying her like she was a problem he couldn't quite figure out how to solve. Welcome back, he said. You were out for about 2 hours. My hands, Clara managed. The pain was excruciating, like every nerve was screaming at once. Thawing out. I've got them in warm water, not hot. That would make it worse, just warm. He gestured to a basin on the table beside the bed, where her hands were indeed submerged to the wrists. My feet. Same thing. You got lucky, Miss Whitmore. Another hour and you'd have lost fingers. Maybe toes. Lucky. There was that word again. Clara tried to sit up, but her body protested. Everything ached. Her muscles felt like they'd been beaten with hammers. Easy, the man said, putting a hand on her shoulder. Not roughly, but firmly enough to keep her down. You've been through hell. Give yourself a minute. Who are you? Clara asked. Rowan Mercer. I've got a ranch about 3 miles south of Black Hollow. Mr. Mercer, just Rowan. Mr. Mercer, Clara repeated, because calling a strange man by his first name felt wrong even under these circumstances. I need to get to town. I'm supposed to start teaching on Monday. Today's Saturday. You've got time. But my belongings, I'll go back for them at first light, assuming the wolves haven't gotten to them. Clara's stomach dropped. Wolves? You didn't notice them following you? Rowan raised an eyebrow. There were tracks all around where I found you. 3, maybe 4 animals. They were circling, waiting for you to stop moving. The casual way he said it made her skin crawl. She'd thought the howling was just the wind, or her imagination. The idea that she'd been stalked, that predators had been watching her struggle. I didn't know, she whispered. Course you didn't. City girl like you probably thinks wolves are like the dogs in storybooks. Rowan moved to the stove, poured something from a pot into a cup. They're not. They're smart, and they're patient, and they know when something's weak enough to take down. He brought the cup to her, coffee, from the smell of it, strong enough to strip paint. Can you hold this? Clara tried to lift her hands from the basin. Her fingers barely moved. The pain intensified, making her gasp. Guess not. Rowan set the cup down, then pulled a chair over and sat beside the bed. I'm going to help you drink. Don't make it weird. Before Clara could process what that meant, he was lifting her head with one hand and holding the cup to her lips with the other. The coffee was hot and bitter and absolutely awful, but it was also the best thing she'd ever tasted. Slow, Rowan said when she tried to gulp it down. You'll make yourself sick. She forced herself to sip instead of guzzle, even though every instinct screamed at her to drink faster. When the cup was empty, Rowan set it aside and lowered her head back to the pillow. Better? He asked. Yes, thank you. Don't thank me yet. You're not out of the woods. He gestured to her hands. We won't know the extent of the damage until tomorrow. You might still lose something. The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, made Clara's throat tight. She looked down at her submerged hands, watching them throb in time with her heartbeat. I can't lose my fingers, she said quietly. I need them, for writing, for teaching. Then you should have thought of that before you let yourself freeze. The words were harsh, but his tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact, like he was stating an obvious truth. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. From the pain, from the fear, from the horrible realization that she'd almost died before her life had even really started. Hey, Rowan's voice softened slightly. You're alive. That counts for something. Does it? The words came out bitter. I haven't even made it to Black Hollow yet, and already everything's gone wrong. The stagecoach abandoned me. I almost froze. I might lose my fingers. This is supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to prove I can do something meaningful, and I can't even survive the trip. So you made some mistakes. Welcome to the frontier. Everyone who comes here makes mistakes. Most of them die. You didn't. Not yet. Not ever, if you're smart. Rowan stood, checked her hands in the basin. Color's coming back. That's good. Means the blood flow isn't permanently damaged. Clara looked down. He was right. Her fingers were less white now, more pink. Still swollen and painful, but definitely less corpse-like. How long until I can use them? Couple days, probably. Maybe a week if the frostbite's worse than it looks. A week. Clara's stomach sank. She was supposed to start teaching in 2 days. How was she supposed to write on a chalkboard, hold books, turn pages, if her hands didn't work? I can't wait a week, she said. You don't have a choice. You don't understand. The town council hired me. They're expecting me. If I don't show up, if I can't teach, they'll what? Fire the only teacher willing to come to Black Hollow? Doubt it. Rowan moved back to the stove, refilled the coffee cup. This town's been without a proper school for 2 years. Another week won't kill anyone. But, Miss Whitmore. He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something like sympathy in his eyes. You almost died tonight. Your body needs time to recover. Pushing yourself before you're ready won't prove anything except that you're too stubborn to know your own limits. I know my limits. Do you? He gestured at her hands. Because from where I'm standing, you don't know the first thing about surviving out here. The words stung because they were true. Clara had thought she was prepared, had read books about the frontier, studied maps, practiced her penmanship so she'd be ready to teach in whatever conditions she found. But none of that had prepared her for the reality of it. The brutal, unforgiving reality that didn't care about her education or her determination or her desperate need to prove herself. "I'll learn," she said quietly. "Maybe." Rowan drank his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "Or maybe you'll realize this was a mistake and run back to Boston with your tail between your legs." "I won't. Everyone says that. I mean it. So did they." Clara wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she was too tired. The pain in her hands was fading to a dull throb, and exhaustion was creeping in again, pulling at her eyelids. "Get some sleep," Rowan said, as if sensing it. "I'll keep the fire going. Your hands need to stay warm." "Where will you sleep?" He gestured to the floor. "Got a bedroll. I'll be fine." "I can't take your bed." "You already did." "Go to sleep, Miss Whitmore." Clara wanted to protest more, but her eyes were already closing. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Rowan settling onto the floor beside the stove, his back against the wall, his coffee cup cradled in his hands like it was the only warm thing in the world. Morning came with gray light and the smell of bacon. Clara woke slowly, her body protesting every small movement. Everything hurt, her hands, her feet, her muscles, her head. It felt like she'd been trampled by horses. "You're awake." Rowan's voice came from across the room. He was standing at the stove, poking at something in a cast-iron pan. "How do you feel?" "Like death." "Better than being dead." He scooped whatever he was cooking onto a plate, brought it over. "Can you sit up?" Clara tried. Her arm shook with the effort, but she managed to prop herself against the headboard. Rowan handed her the plate. Bacon, eggs, and something that might have been biscuits if you were being generous. "I can't hold it," she said, looking at her bandaged hands. "Right." Rowan pulled the chair over again, sat down with the plate balanced on his knee. "Open up." Clara stared at him. "You're going to feed me?" "Unless you've got a better idea. I'm 19 years old. I can feed myself." "Not with those hands, you can't." He held up a forkful of eggs. "Your choice. Eat or go hungry." Clara's stomach growled, making the decision for her. She opened her mouth, face burning with humiliation, and let him feed her like a child. The eggs were overcooked. The bacon was too salty. The biscuits were hard enough to chip teeth. It was still the best meal she'd eaten in days. "You're a terrible cook," she said between bites. "I'm a rancher, not a chef." "Even so. Feel free to cook your own meals once your hands work again." Rowan popped a piece of bacon into his own mouth. "Until then, you get what you get." They ate in silence for a while. Outside the window, snow was falling. Not the romantic, gentle snow of Christmas cards, but thick, heavy flakes that piled up fast. "Is this the storm you mentioned?" Clara asked. "Just the start of it. Real one hits this afternoon." "I need to get to town before then." "Not happening." "But, Miss Whitmore, look outside. That road is going to be impassable by noon. Even if your hands were working, even if you had all your luggage, you wouldn't make it." Clara looked out the window, her heart sinking. He was right. The snow was already ankle deep and getting deeper. "So what do I do?" "You stay here until the storm passes. Then we go to town together." Rowan set the empty plate aside. "Assuming you can walk by then." "Of course I can walk." "Try." Clara swung her legs over the side of the bed. They felt heavy, disconnected. She put weight on her feet and pain shot up her calves, not as bad as her hands, but bad enough to make her gasp. "Frostbite," Rowan said. "Your toes took some damage too. Nothing permanent, probably, but you're not walking 5 miles anytime soon." Clara wanted to cry, or scream, or both. Instead, she just sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at her useless hands and her aching feet, feeling like the universe was playing some cosmic joke at her expense. "Hey," Rowan's voice was softer now. "It's not the end of the world." "Isn't it?" Clara looked up at him. "I came here to teach, to prove I could do something meaningful, and I can't even make it to town without nearly dying. So you had a rough start. Doesn't mean you're finished." "Doesn't it?" Everyone was right. My father, the other passengers on the stagecoach, probably half the people in Black Hollow who think a woman can't handle frontier life. They were all right, and I was wrong. "You're not wrong, you're just unprepared." Rowan stood, moved back to the stove. "Big difference." What's the difference? Wrong means you can't do it. Unprepared means you haven't learned how yet. He poured more coffee, brought her a cup. This time her hands could grip it, barely. Everyone who survives out here starts out unprepared. The ones who make it are the ones who learn fast. Clara took a sip of coffee, considering this. And the ones who don't make it? They die. Or they leave. Same difference. That's not encouraging. I'm not here to encourage you. I'm here to tell you the truth. Rowan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. This place doesn't care about your good intentions or your fancy education. It just is what it is. You either adapt or you don't. I'll adapt, Clara said, more to herself than to him. We'll see. The snow kept falling. By midday, the world outside was white and howling, wind battering the small cabin like it wanted to tear it apart. Clara stayed in bed, testing her hands every hour, watching the feeling slowly return to her fingers. Rowan moved around the cabin like the storm didn't exist, checking the fire, cooking meals, repairing a broken chair leg. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was about practical things. How to tell when frostbite was serious, what to do if you got caught in a blizzard, which plants in Wyoming were edible and which would kill you. It was like being taught survival by someone who expected you to need it. Why are you helping me? Clara asked late that afternoon, watching him split kindling by the stove. Because you'd die if I didn't. But you don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Rowan was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the axe. Out here, you help people. Not because you know them, not because they've earned it, but because if you don't, they die. It's that simple. Is it always that simple? Usually. He set down the axe, fed wood into the stove. Sometimes people die anyway, but at least you tried. There was something in his voice, something dark and old, that made Clara think he wasn't talking about her anymore. But before she could ask, he changed the subject. Tell me about this teaching job. How'd you hear about it? Clara wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, grateful for the warmth. Advertisement in a Boston newspaper. Teacher wanted for frontier school. Room and board provided. Salary negotiable. It sounded perfect. Perfect, Rowan snorted. You see the word frontier and think perfect? I saw the word wanted and thought maybe I could be useful somewhere. Weren't you useful in Boston? I was decorative in Boston. There's a difference. Rowan studied her for a moment, something like understanding flickering in his eyes. Your father wanted you to marry well. My father wanted me to marry Richard Thornton, who thinks women should be seen and not heard, and who once told me reading too much would damage my feminine sensibilities. Clara's grip tightened on her cup. I'd rather freeze in Wyoming than spend my life pretending to be stupid for a man who's actually stupid himself. Fair enough. Rowan pulled the chair over, sat down. So you ran. I left, Clara corrected. Running implies I was escaping something. I was moving toward something. What? Purpose. The word hung in the air between them. Outside, the storm howled, but inside the cabin was quiet except for the crackling of the fire. Purpose, Rowan repeated finally. That's what you're after? Isn't that what everyone's after? No. Most people are after survival, money, security. Purpose is a luxury. It shouldn't be. Maybe not, but it is. He stood, moved back to the window. Black Hollow's a hard place, Miss Whitmore. People there are struggling. They don't have time for philosophy or grand ideas about the meaning of life. They're just trying to make it through another winter. I know that. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone who read too many books about the noble frontier and not enough about the reality of it. Clara bristled. I'm not naive. You're 19 years old and you almost froze to death because you didn't know better than to wait for a stagecoach that wasn't coming back. You're a little naive. Then I'll learn not to be. Maybe. Rowan turned to face her. But learning takes time and mistakes, and you don't always get second chances out here. I didn't ask for a lecture. No, you asked why I was helping you. I'm helping you because someone needs to teach you how to survive before you kill yourself. His eyes were hard now, but not unkind. Consider this lesson 1. The frontier doesn't care about your dreams. It only cares about whether you're strong enough to survive it. Clara met his gaze, refusing to look away. Then I'll get strong enough. We'll see, Rowan said again, but this time there was something different in his voice. Not quite respect, but maybe the beginning of it. The storm raged all night. Clara lay awake listening to it, feeling the cabin shake with each gust of wind. She thought about her father in his warm Boston house, about her sister probably preparing for some party or another, about the life she'd left behind. She didn't regret leaving, but lying there in a stranger's cabin, her hands throbbing, her future uncertain, she had to admit that Rowan was right about one thing. She'd been unprepared. She wouldn't make that mistake again. The storm broke on the third day, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of snow. Clara stood at the cabin window, testing her fingers one by one. They moved now, stiff and sore, but functional. The angry red marks had faded to a dull pink, and the swelling was mostly gone. She'd gotten lucky. Rowan had told her that twice this morning, like he couldn't quite believe it himself. "Road should be passable by tomorrow," he said from behind her, pulling on his coat. "I'm heading out to check the fences. Some of my cattle probably broke through during the storm. Can I come with you?" Rowan turned to look at her, one eyebrow raised. "You can barely walk across the room without wincing." "I can walk fine." "You're limping." "Barely." "Miss Whitmore, I've been stuck in this cabin for 3 days," Clara said, hearing the edge in her own voice. "If I have to stare at these 4 walls for another hour, I'm going to lose my mind." Rowan studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Your funeral, but when your feet give out, I'm not carrying you back." "I won't need you to." She regretted the words 20 minutes later when her boots, still damp from 3 days ago, rubbed blisters on top of her healing frostbite, and every step felt like walking on broken glass. But she'd be damned if she'd admit it. Instead, she gritted her teeth and followed Rowan through the snow, trying not to let him see her limp. The ranch was bigger than she'd expected. Not the tidy, organized kind of farm she'd seen in paintings, but a sprawling operation that looked like it had been built piece by piece over years. Fences that didn't quite match. A barn that leaned slightly to the left. Cattle scattered across the white landscape like dark stones. "How many head do you have?" Clara asked, more to distract herself from the pain than because she cared. "About 200. Had closer to 300 before last winter." Rowan's voice was flat, matter of fact. "Lost a third of them to the cold." "That's terrible." "That's ranching." He stopped at a section of fence, examined where the wood had splintered. "You lose animals, you lose money, you fix what broke and hope next year's better." "Does it get better?" "Sometimes." He pulled a hammer from his belt, started prying loose nails from the damaged boards. "Sometimes it gets worse. You learn to take what comes." Clara watched him work, noticing the ease of his movements. This was what he knew, fixing things, building things, surviving through sheer, stubborn endurance. There was something almost graceful about it, the way his hands moved without hesitation. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. 6 years. "Where were you before that?" Rowan's hands paused for just a second before resuming their work. "Somewhere else." The tone made it clear the subject was closed. Clara let it drop, turning her attention to the landscape instead. From here she could see for miles, nothing but white prairie and gray sky, empty and enormous. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it just felt lonely. "Is it always this quiet?" she asked. "Pretty much." "Doesn't it bother you?" "Why would it?" "I don't know. The isolation, the silence. Don't you ever want to talk to someone?" Rowan pulled a new board from the pile beside the fence, lined it up. "I'm talking to you, aren't I?" "Only because I forced you to rescue me." "True enough." He hammered the board into place with 3 solid strikes. "Most days I go weeks without seeing another person. Suits me fine." "I don't think I could stand it," Clara said quietly. "Being alone that much." "You get used to it. After a while, you even prefer it." "Why?" "Because people are complicated. Cattle aren't." He moved to the next broken section. "Cattle need food, water, shelter. Give them that, they're fine. People always want something more." Clara thought about her father, her sister, Richard Thornton and his banking empire. All the people back in Boston who'd had plans for her life, expectations she was supposed to meet. Rowan was right. People did want things. The question was whether what they wanted was worth giving. "What if what they want is worth it?" she asked. "Then it's not complicated." Rowan didn't look up from his work. But that's rare. They finished the fence repairs in silence. By the time they headed back to the cabin, Clara's feet were screaming, and she was pretty sure she'd reopened at least 2 blisters. She made it to the porch before her legs finally gave out. Told you, Rowan said, catching her before she hit the ground. Don't. Don't what? Don't say I told you so. Wasn't going to. He half carried her inside, deposited her on the bed with less gentleness than before. But I'm thinking it real loud. Clara wanted to snap at him, but she was too tired. Instead, she just sat there while he pulled off her boots and examined the damage. You're an idiot, he said, looking at her feet. Thank you for that professional medical opinion. I'm serious. You knew your feet weren't healed, and you pushed anyway. Now you've set yourself back another few days. He grabbed a basin, filled it with water from the kettle. Stubborn doesn't mean strong, Miss Whitmore. Sometimes it just means stupid. The words hit harder than they should have. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, from pain, from frustration, from the horrible suspicion that he was right. I just wanted to do something, she said quietly, besides sit here feeling useless. You're recovering. That's not useless. It feels useless. Rowan set the basin down, gestured for her to put her feet in. The warm water stung like hell, but Clara kept her face neutral. You want to know what's really useless? Rowan asked. Pretending you're fine when you're not. Pushing past your limits because you're too proud to admit you have them. That's how people get themselves killed out here. I'm not going to get killed. Not if you learn to pace yourself. He sat back in the chair, arms crossed. You've got time, Miss Whitmore. The school's not going anywhere. Black Hollow's not going anywhere. Slow down. Clara stared at the water, watching her feet blur beneath the surface. Everything in her screamed against slowing down. She'd spent her whole life being told to wait. Wait until you're older. Wait until you're married. Wait for a man to give you permission to matter. Coming to Wyoming was supposed to be different. She was supposed to take charge of her own life, prove she could do things herself. Instead, she was right back to depending on someone else. I hate this, she said. I know. I'm supposed to be teaching by now, making a difference. Instead, I'm sitting in your cabin soaking my feet like an invalid. Yep. That's all you have to say. Yep. Rowan shrugged. What do you want me to say? That it's not fair? It's not. That you deserve better? Probably. But none of that changes where you are right now. So I should just accept it. You should accept what is, so you can figure out what's next. He stood, moved to the stove. Feeling sorry for yourself doesn't change anything, just makes you miserable. Clara wanted to argue, but the truth of it settled over her like weight. He was right. She could rage against the unfairness of it all, or she could deal with the reality in front of her. One was useless. The other might actually accomplish something. Fine, she said. What's next? Next, you let your feet heal properly. Then we go to town, I introduce you to the school board, and you start teaching. Rowan poured coffee, handed her a cup. In that order. When? When you can walk 5 miles without collapsing. And when will that be? When it happens. Clara sipped her coffee, tasting the bitterness. Everything about this place was bitter. The cold, the isolation, the constant struggle just to survive. She wondered if she'd ever get used to it, or if she'd spend the rest of her life feeling like she was one mistake away from disaster. Tell me about Black Hollow, she said, needing to think about something besides her aching feet. Not much to tell. About 80 people, give or take. Most of them ranchers or farmers. A few folks who run the general store, the boarding house, the saloon. That's it? That's it. We're not exactly Denver. What about the children? How many students will I have? Rowan considered this. Maybe 15, 20, if you count the ones who live too far out to come regular. Ages probably range from 6 to 16. That's a big age spread. That's what happens when you don't have a teacher for 2 years. Kids who should have graduated are still waiting to learn to read. The weight of that settled on Clara's shoulders. 15 or 20 children who'd been waiting for someone to teach them, who'd spent years falling further behind because no one had wanted to come to this isolated frontier town. What happened to the last teacher? She asked. Died. Clara's cup stopped halfway to her lips. Died how? Pneumonia. Winter of 74. She was 63, been teaching here since the town started. Rowan refilled his own cup. After she passed, the school board tried to find a replacement, but most teachers don't want to come out here. Too remote. Too dangerous. Too poor. But they found me. They got desperate. Placed ads in newspapers back east, hoping someone young and idealistic would bite. He looked at her over his cup. Guess it worked. Young and idealistic, Clara repeated. Is that what you think I am? Aren't you? She wanted to deny it, but what else could explain why she was here? Why she'd left behind comfort and security for a teaching job in a place she'd never seen? If that wasn't idealism, what was it? Maybe, she admitted, but idealism isn't the same as stupidity. Never said it was. Sometimes idealism's the only thing that gets people through the hard parts. Rowan stood, stretched. Just don't let it blind you to reality. What reality? That this place breaks most people who come here. The ones who survive are the ones who learn to bend instead. Clara thought about that while Rowan went outside to tend the animals. Bending versus breaking. Was there really a difference? Or was bending just breaking slowly, piece by piece, until you didn't recognize yourself anymore? She didn't have an answer, but she knew one thing: she hadn't come this far to break. Whatever it took, she'd learn to survive this place, learn to teach these children, learn to prove that her father had been wrong about her, even if it killed her. The days settled into a rhythm. Mornings meant checking her hands and feet, testing whether they could handle more. Afternoons meant small tasks, helping Rowan with cooking, mending a torn shirt, reading from the single book he owned. Evenings meant sitting by the fire while the temperature dropped and the wind howled outside. It should have been boring. Instead, Clara found it almost peaceful. There was something freeing about the simplicity of it. No social obligations, no performance of femininity, no pretending to be less intelligent than she was for the comfort of men who felt threatened by educated women. Here, she could just be. You're better at this than I expected, Rowan said on the fourth night, watching her stitch up a rip in his work shirt. Better at what? Sewing? Not giving up. Clara kept her eyes on the needle. Did you expect me to give up? Most city folk do. First time things get hard, they remember how much easier life was back home. He poked at the fire with a stick. Figured you'd be begging me to take you back to the nearest town with a train station by now. Sorry to disappoint you. I'm not disappointed. He was quiet for a moment. Surprised, maybe. Clara finished the seam, bit off the thread. Why? Because I'm a woman? Or because I'm young? Because you almost died and you're still here. She handed him the shirt. Where else would I go? Back to Boston. Back to your father's house and that banker he wanted you to marry. I'd rather freeze again. Rowan actually smiled at that. A small, brief thing that was gone almost before Clara registered it, but it had been there. Proof that somewhere under all that hard-edged survival instinct was a person capable of warmth. What about you? Clara asked. You never answered my question from before. Where were you before Wyoming? The smile disappeared. Told you. Somewhere else? That's not an answer. It's all the answer you're getting. Clara studied him across the fire. There was something in the set of his jaw, the way his eyes went distant, that told her this wasn't just privacy. This was pain. Whatever it is, she said carefully, it doesn't matter to me. It should. Why? Because I'm not a good man, Miss Whitmore, and good women shouldn't waste their time on men like me. The words were harsh, but there was something underneath them that sounded almost like warning, like he was trying to protect her from something. I'll decide for myself who's worth my time, Clara said. Rowan looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Not softness exactly, but maybe the beginning of respect. You're stubborn as hell, he said. So I've been told. It's going to get you in trouble. Probably. Clara leaned back, flexing her fingers. They moved easily now, the stiffness mostly gone. But it'll also keep me alive. Maybe. Rowan stood, stretched. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll try walking to the property line and back. If you can manage that without falling apart, we'll head to town the day after. Clara's heart jumped. Really? If you're ready. I'm ready. We'll see. But the next morning, when Clara walked the mile to the property line and back without stopping, Rowan didn't say anything. He just nodded once, sharp and definite, and Clara knew what it meant. She'd passed the test. That night, lying in the dark while Rowan's breathing evened out on the floor below, Clara let herself think about what came next. The school, the children, the town that had been waiting 2 years for a teacher. She was terrified. Not of the teaching itself, she knew she could do that, but of everything else. Of being judged by people who already doubted her, of failing in front of a whole community, of proving her father right. "You awake?" Rowan's voice came from the darkness. "Yes." "You nervous about tomorrow?" Clara almost lied, but something about the darkness made truth easier. "Terrified." "Good." "Good? Means you're taking it seriously." She heard him shift on the floor. People who aren't scared usually underestimate what they're up against. "What if I can't do it? What if I'm not good enough?" "Then you'll fail, and you'll figure out what to do next." "That's supposed to be comforting?" "It's supposed to be honest." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "You want comfort, Miss Whitmore, you're in the wrong place. But if you want truth, you're stronger than you think, tougher than you give yourself credit for. You'll probably be fine." "Probably?" "I'm not going to lie and say definitely." Clara smiled into the darkness. "Fair enough." She fell asleep thinking about that word. Probably. Not a guarantee. Not a promise. Just a realistic assessment from someone who'd seen her at her worst and still thought she had a chance. It was enough. They left at dawn, Clara's recovered trunks loaded in the wagon behind them. Rowan had retrieved them the morning after the storm, and miraculously, the wolves hadn't touched them. Everything was there, her clothes, her books, her teaching supplies. "You got lucky," Rowan had said when he'd brought them back. They were more interested in a dead rabbit nearby. Clara had just been grateful something had finally gone right. Now, sitting beside Rowan on the wagon bench, watching Black Hollow appear on the horizon, she felt her stomach twist into knots. The town was smaller than she'd imagined. A single main street lined with buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together in a hurry and never quite finished. The general store had a crooked sign. The boarding house needed paint. The saloon was the nicest building, which probably said something about priorities. And at the end of the street, set back behind a bare yard, was the schoolhouse. Clara's heart sank. The building was small. One room, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. The roof sagged in the middle. Several windows were broken, covered with boards instead of glass. The front steps were rotting. "That's the school?" she asked. "Yep." "It's falling apart." "Yep." "How am I supposed to teach in that?" "Same way the last teacher did, I imagine." Rowan pulled the wagon to a stop. "It's not much, but it's what there is." Clara stared at the building, feeling something crumble inside her. This was what she'd left Boston for? This wreck of a building in the middle of nowhere? "Hey," Rowan's voice was gentle. "You've survived worse in the last week." "Have I?" "You survived me. This should be easy." Despite herself, Clara laughed. It came out shaky, but it was there. "Come on," Rowan said, climbing down from the wagon. "Let's get you settled at the boarding house. Then I'll introduce you to the school board." The boarding house was run by a woman named Margaret Hastings, who took one look at Clara and frowned. "You're the new teacher? You're a child." "I'm 19, Clara said, trying to sound authoritative. "Like I said, a child." But Margaret's expression softened slightly. "Well, you're here now. Might as well come in." The boarding house was cleaner than Clara expected. Simple, but well maintained. Margaret showed her to a small room on the second floor with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. "Meals are at 6, noon, and 6, Margaret said. "Don't be late or you don't eat. Rent's $5 a month due on the 1st. You cause trouble, you're out. Clear?" "Crystal." "Good." Margaret paused at the door. "Fair warning, half this town thinks hiring a woman teacher was a mistake. They'll be watching you, waiting for you to fail. Don't give them the satisfaction." Before Clara could respond, she was gone. Clara sat on the bed, feeling the weight of it all settle on her shoulders. Everyone waiting for her to fail. A school that was falling apart. Children who'd been without proper education for 2 years. What the hell had she gotten herself into? A knock at the door interrupted her spiral. "School board's waiting," Rowan's voice called. "You ready?" No, Clara thought, but she stood anyway, smoothed her skirt, and opened the door. As ready as I'll ever be. The school board consisted of 3 men, all of them looking at Clara like she was something curiosity. "This is her?" the oldest one asked Rowan. "She's younger than I expected." "Age doesn't determine competence, Mr. Porter," Clara said before Rowan could answer. Porter's eyebrows rose. "Spirited, that's good. You'll need it." He gestured to the other 2 men. This is Samuel Turner. He runs the general store. And Henry Walsh owns the largest ranch after Mercer here. Gentlemen, Clara said, shaking each of their hands firmly. Her father had taught her that much. A weak handshake made people doubt you. We're glad you made it, Walsh said, though we heard you had some trouble on the journey. Nothing I couldn't handle. She nearly froze to death, Rowan said flatly. Clara shot him a look. I survived. Barely. Surviving's what matters. Porter cleared his throat. Yes? Well, let's discuss the position. You'll be teaching Monday through Friday, 8 to 3. You're responsible for all subjects: reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography. Any questions? How many students? We've got about 17 signed up so far. Might be more once word spreads you've arrived. 17. Clara's mind raced, already planning lessons, thinking about how to divide them by ability level. What about supplies? She asked. There's some books left from the previous teacher. Paper and slates are in the supply closet. Chalk too, though we're running low. Turner shifted uncomfortably. Budget's tight, Miss Whitmore. We can't afford much. I brought some materials of my own, Clara said. It'll be enough to start. The three men exchanged glances. You understand this won't be easy, Walsh said. Some of these children are practically wild. No discipline, no structure. Their parents work them hard on the farms and ranches. They're not going to want to sit still and learn grammar. Then I'll make them want to, Clara said. Porter smiled. Confident. I like that. He stood, extended his hand. Welcome to Black Hollow, Miss Whitmore. School starts Monday. Don't disappoint us. As they filed out, Rowan hung back. You did good, he said quietly. I haven't done anything yet. You didn't let them intimidate you. That's something. He headed for the door, then paused. You need anything? My ranch is 3 miles south. Anyone in town can point you there. Why would I need anything from you? Rowan looked back at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Because you're stubborn enough to keep going even when you should ask for help. Figure I should remind you the option exists. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts and the weight of Monday morning pressing down on her like physical force. She walked to the schoolhouse that evening, wanting to see it without anyone watching. Inside, it was worse than she'd feared. Broken furniture, holes in the roof, a stove that looked like it hadn't worked in months, dirt and debris everywhere. This was where she was supposed to teach? Clara stood in the middle of the room, fighting the urge to cry, or scream, or get on the next stagecoach east and admit her father had been right. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and started cleaning. By the time Clara finished sweeping the schoolhouse floor, her hands were blistered and her back ached. The sun had set an hour ago, and she was working by lamplight, watching dust motes dance in the amber glow. She'd filled 2 buckets with debris, broken slate pieces, bird droppings, something that might have been a dead mouse, but she'd refused to look too closely. The door creaked open behind her. You planning to sleep here too? Margaret stood in the doorway, arms crossed. It's past 8. Supper's cold. I'll eat later. No, you'll eat now, before you collapse. Margaret stepped inside, surveying the work Clara had done. Her expression softened fractionally. It looks better. Still a disaster, but better. Clara set down her broom, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. I need to fix the stove before Monday, and the windows. And at least half these desks are unusable. Samuel Turner's boy might help with the desks. He's decent with woodwork. Margaret picked up one of the broken slates, examined it. Windows are going to be harder. Glass is expensive out here. I'll figure something out. You always this stubborn? Only when it matters. Margaret snorted. Come on. You're no good to anyone if you work yourself to death before classes even start. Clara wanted to argue, but her stomach chose that moment to growl loud enough to echo in the empty room. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Fine, Clara conceded, but I'm coming back tomorrow. Wouldn't expect anything different. They walked back to the boarding house in silence. The town was dark, except for lamplight spilling from windows and the raucous noise coming from the saloon. Clara could hear piano music, off-key and enthusiastic, and men's voices raised in laughter. You'll want to avoid that place, Margaret said, nodding toward the saloon. Nothing good happens there after dark. I wasn't planning to visit. Good. Because if you did, every mother in this town would pull their children from your school faster than you could blink. Margaret pushed open the boarding house door. Like I said, they're watching you. One misstep and you're done. The pressure of it sat heavy on Clara's chest. She'd known being a woman teacher would invite scrutiny, but the reality of it felt different than the abstract idea. Every choice she made, every word she spoke, every place she went, all of it would be judged, measured, used as evidence for or against her competence. "How do I avoid making missteps?" Clara asked quietly. "You don't." Margaret ladled soup into a bowl, handed it to Clara. "You just make damn sure the missteps you make are the ones you can live with." Clara ate the soup, some kind of vegetable stew, lukewarm but edible, while Margaret moved around the kitchen with efficient purpose. There was something comforting about the older woman's pragmatic presence. No false encouragement, no empty promises. Just the truth, delivered plainly. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "Already did." "Why did the school board hire me? There must have been other applicants, older ones, more experienced." Margaret paused in her work, then sat down across from Clara with her own bowl. "There weren't other applicants. You were the only one desperate or crazy enough to come." "Oh." They advertised for 8 months, got 3 responses. 2 withdrew after they learned how remote Black Hollow was. You were all that was left. Margaret's eyes were sharp. "So no, they didn't hire you because you were qualified. They hired you because you were available. Now you have to prove you were worth hiring." The honesty stung, but Clara appreciated it more than she would have appreciated a lie. At least she knew where she stood. "I will prove it," she said. "Maybe. Or maybe you'll quit after the first week when Eli Turner throws a frog at your head and the Peterson twins refuse to stop wrestling during lessons." Margaret sipped her soup. "We'll see." Clara finished her meal and climbed the stairs to her room, exhaustion settling into her bones like sediment. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her, footsteps on the floor below, wind rattling the windows, her own heartbeat, too fast and too loud. Monday was 2 days away. She needed those 2 days. Saturday morning, Clara woke before dawn and went straight back to the schoolhouse. She'd made a list the night before. Everything that needed fixing, organized by priority. The stove was first. Without heat, the children would freeze, and she'd lose half her students to parents keeping them home where it was warm. She was examining the stove's broken flue when someone cleared their throat behind her. Clara turned to find a boy of about 16 standing in the doorway, tall and lanky, with dark hair and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "You the new teacher?" he asked. "Clara Whitmore. And you are?" "Eli Turner. My pa said I should help you fix stuff." He said it like it was a punishment. Clara remembered the name, Samuel Turner's son, the one Margaret had mentioned, also the one Margaret had warned would throw frogs at her head. "I appreciate the help," she said carefully. "Do you know anything about stoves?" Eli shrugged, walked over to examine the damage. "Flue's cracked. Needs replacing. We've got some spare pipe at the store. Can you get it? Can you pay for it?" Clara hesitated. Her salary wouldn't start until she'd been teaching for a month, and she'd spent most of her savings on the trip west. "How much?" $3. "I don't have $3. Eli looked at her like she was simple. "Then I guess you're teaching without heat." "Wait." Clara's mind raced. "What if I trade for it? I could teach you something. Reading, mathematics, whatever you need." "I can already read." "Then something else. Science? History? Latin?" "Why would I need Latin?" Eli started toward the door. "Thanks anyway, Miss Whitmore. Good luck freezing." "Stop!" Clara's voice came out sharper than she intended. Eli paused, turned back. "You don't want to be here. I understand that. But those children who are coming Monday, they need a warm room to learn in. So unless you want to explain to them why they're sitting in the cold because you couldn't be bothered to help, you'll figure out a way to get me that stovepipe." Eli stared at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he grinned. "You've got spine, I'll give you that. Most teachers would have just begged." "I don't beg." "I noticed." He considered her. "Fine, I'll bring the pipe. But you owe me." "Owe you what?" "Haven't decided yet." Eli headed for the door again, then looked back. "Fair warning, Miss Whitmore. I'm the best behaved of the older boys. The others are going to test you a lot harder than I just did." He left before Clara could respond. She stood alone in the schoolhouse, heart pounding. That had been a test, and she'd either passed or failed. She couldn't quite tell which. Eli returned an hour later with the stovepipe, a toolbox, and an expression that suggested he was doing her the world's biggest favor. Clara watched him work, noticing the confident way he handled the tools. This was someone who'd been fixing things since he could walk. "How long have you been out of school?" she asked. 3 years since Miss Brennan died. "Why didn't you go back when the town tried to find a replacement?" "Because I'm 16 and I can already read and write. What else do I need?" Eli fitted the new pipe into place. "Besides, Pa needs me at the store." "What about after the store? Don't you want to do something else with your life?" "Like what? Become a lawyer? A doctor?" Eli laughed, but there was bitterness in it. "This is Black Hollow, Miss Whitmore. We don't get those kind of choices." Clara thought about that while Eli finished the repair. She'd come here thinking education could change lives, open doors. But what doors were there to open in a place like this? What future could these children build besides the one their parents had? "There," Eli said, standing back. "Should work now. Try it." Clara lit a fire in the stove. Smoke rose properly through the flue this time, and heat began radiating into the room. She could have cried with relief. "Thank you," she said. "Remember, you owe me." Eli packed up his tools. "I'll collect eventually." After he left, Clara attacked the rest of her list with renewed energy. She organized the usable desks into rows, stacked the broken ones outside. She washed the windows that weren't broken, hung cloth over the ones that were. She found a bucket of whitewash in the supply closet and used it to cover the worst stains on the walls. By Sunday evening, the schoolhouse looked almost presentable. Not good exactly, but functional. A place where learning could happen, if Clara could just figure out how to make it happen. She was sweeping the front steps when Rowan's wagon pulled up. "Heard you've been working yourself to the bone," he said, climbing down. "Came to see if you were still alive." "Barely. Place looks better." He surveyed the building with a critical eye. "You fixed the stove?" Eli Turner did. "That must have cost you." "He said I owe him." "Hasn't decided what yet." Rowan's expression darkened. "Be careful with that boy. He's not as harmless as he seems." "He seemed helpful enough." "That's what I mean." Rowan leaned against the wagon. "Eli Turner's smart, probably the smartest kid in this town, and he knows it, uses it to get what he wants." "What does he want?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Rowan pulled a package from the wagon bed, handed it to her. "Brought you something." Clara unwrapped it to find a stack of slate boards, new ones, not broken or cracked. "Where did you get these?" she asked. "Ordered them from Denver last month. Figured you'd need supplies." He shifted uncomfortably. "Don't make a big deal about it." But Clara was already making a big deal about it in her head. These must have cost money Rowan probably didn't have to spare, and he'd ordered them before he even met her, just on the chance the new teacher would need them. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This means a lot. Just don't waste them on kids who won't appreciate it." "I won't waste them." Rowan nodded, started to climb back into the wagon, then hesitated. "You nervous about tomorrow?" "Terrified." "You'll be fine." "You don't know that." "No. But I know you." He met her eyes. "You're too stubborn to fail." He drove off before Clara could respond, leaving her standing on the schoolhouse steps with a stack of slate boards and a strange warm feeling in her chest that she didn't quite know what to do with. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, with clouds threatening snow. Clara stood at the front of the classroom at 7:30, half an hour before school was supposed to start, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd arranged the desks in neat rows, written the day's schedule on the blackboard, laid out the slate boards Rowan had brought. Everything was ready. She just had to survive the next 7 hours. The first student arrived at 7:45, a small girl with pigtails and a dress that had been mended so many times it was more patch than original fabric. "Are you the teacher?" the girl asked from the doorway. "I am. What's your name?" "Lucy Peterson. I'm 7. She stepped inside cautiously, like the room might bite. "My mama said you're from Boston." "That's right." "Is Boston big?" "Very big." "Bigger than Black Hollow?" Clara smiled despite her nerves. "Much bigger." Lucy considered this, then claimed a desk in the front row. "I like your dress." "Thank you." More children trickled in over the next 20 minutes. The Peterson twins Margaret had mentioned, boys about 9 years old who immediately started shoving each other. A girl named Sarah with a scar on her cheek who sat in the back and glared at everyone. 2 younger children who might have been siblings, both shy and wide-eyed. By 8 o'clock, Clara had counted 14 students. She was starting to think the other 3 wouldn't show when Eli Turner walked in with 2 other teenage boys. "Miss Whitmore, meet Jake Crawford and Tom Walsh," Eli said, gesturing to his companions. Both were roughly his age. Both looked like they'd rather be dragging barbed wire than sitting in school. "We're here under duress. Our parents made us come." "Noted," Clara said. "Take your seats, gentlemen." "Gentlemen," Jake snorted. "Hear that, Tom? We're gentlemen now." "Sit down," Clara repeated, putting steel in her voice. They sat, but the contempt was obvious. This was going to be harder than she'd thought. At 8:15, when no more students had arrived, Clara closed the door and stood at the front of the room. 17 faces stared back at her, some curious, some bored, some actively hostile. "Good morning," she said, keeping her voice steady. "My name is Miss Whitmore, and I'm your new teacher. I know many of you haven't had regular schooling in a while, so we're going to start by figuring out what everyone knows." "I know you're going to quit before winter's over," Jake called out. "Just like the last 2 they tried to hire." Several students laughed. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for that prediction, Mr. Crawford. Now let's begin with reading. I'm going to ask each of you to read a passage from this book." She held up one of the primers she'd brought from Boston. "We'll start with the youngest students and work our way up." The morning was brutal. Half the children could barely read. The other half were so far ahead they were bored within minutes. The Peterson twins got in a fistfight over a pencil. Sarah refused to read out loud at all. And the older boys spent the entire time whispering amongst themselves, clearly plotting something. By noon, Clara's head was pounding and her voice was hoarse from trying to maintain order over the chaos. "Lunch break," she announced. "Be back in 1 hour." The children scattered like startled birds. Clara sank into her chair, dropping her head into her hands. This was a disaster. She'd prepared lessons for a classroom of students at roughly the same level. Instead, she had everyone from children who could barely write their names to teenagers who were only here because their parents forced them. How was she supposed to teach them all? "Not going well, is it?" Clara looked up to find Eli leaning against the door frame eating an apple. "Shouldn't you be at lunch?" she asked. "I am at lunch." He took another bite. "So are you going to quit, or are you actually going to try teaching us something?" "What makes you think I'd quit?" "Because this morning you looked like you wanted to cry, or throw something. Maybe both." Clara wanted to deny it, but what was the point? He was right. "It's my first day," she said instead. "I'm still learning." "Learning what? How to control a classroom? How to make kids who don't want to be here pay attention?" Eli tossed his apple core out the door. "Good luck with that. We've had 5 different teachers try since Miss Brennan died. None of them lasted more than a month." "I'm not them." "No, you're younger. Less experienced. Easier to break." He started to leave, then paused. "If you want my advice, which you probably don't, stop trying to teach us like we're a real school. We're not. We're a bunch of farm kids who'd rather be working than sitting in here listening to someone from Boston tell us about things we'll never see." He left before Clara could respond. She sat alone in the empty schoolhouse, Eli's words echoing in her head. Stop trying to teach them like we're a real school. But if she didn't treat this like a real school, what was the point? Why had she come all this way if she was just going to accept that these children deserved less than the students back in Boston? No, she wouldn't accept that. Clara stood, walked to the blackboard, and erased everything she'd written. Then she wrote 3 words. "What matters here?" When the students returned from lunch, they found her sitting on the edge of her desk instead of standing behind it. "Change of plans," she announced. "I spent this morning trying to teach you things I thought you should know. I was wrong. So now I want to hear from you. What do you actually need to learn?" Silence. The children exchanged confused glances. "Come on," Clara pressed. "There must be something. Reading, writing, mathematics, science. I need to know how to keep accounts," Eli said finally. "For the store. Pa's hopeless with numbers." "All right, what else?" "I want to read better," Lucy said quietly. "There's a book at the general store I want to read, but the words are too hard." "Good. Anyone else? Slowly, haltingly, the children began to speak up. Tom wanted to learn about animal husbandry because his father's ranch was struggling. Sarah wanted to know how to write letters. Her brother had moved to California, and she couldn't keep in touch. The Peterson twins wanted to learn about mining because they'd heard there was silver in the hills. Clara listened, taking notes, her mind racing. This was nothing like the structured curriculum she'd prepared. But it was real. It was what these children actually cared about. "All right," she said when they'd finished. "Here's what we're going to do. Mornings will be basics, reading, writing, arithmetic. Everyone needs those, no exceptions. But afternoons, we're going to work on the things you actually want to learn. Deal?" The students looked skeptical, but several nodded. "One more thing," Clara said. "I know I'm young. I know I'm from the city. I know you don't think I can survive here. Maybe you're right, but I'm going to try anyway, and I need you to try with me, not for your parents, not for the school board, for yourselves, because you deserve to learn, even if no one's told you that before." The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Lucy raised her hand. "Yes, Lucy? Can we start with the reading? I really want to read that book." Clara smiled. "We can start with the reading." The afternoon wasn't perfect. The Peterson twins still fought. Jake and Tom still whispered. But there was something different in the air, a tentative possibility that maybe this could work. When 3 o'clock came and the students filed out, Clara collapsed into her chair, exhausted but not defeated. She'd survived day one. "Still alive, I see." Margaret stood in the doorway, arms crossed but expression less severe than usual. "Barely," Clara admitted. "Heard you changed your whole teaching plan after lunch. Word travels fast. This is Black Hollow. Everything travels fast." Margaret stepped inside, surveyed the room. "Folks are talking. Some think you're soft for letting the students dictate the curriculum. Others think you're smart for meeting them where they are. What do you think?" "I think you've got spine." Margaret picked up one of the slate boards, examined it. "But spine alone won't keep them coming back. You've got to give them something worth showing up for." "I'm trying." "I know. Just don't try so hard you burn yourself out." Margaret set down the slate. "Supper's at 6. Don't be late." Clara spent another hour organizing materials before walking back to the boarding house. Her feet ached. Her throat hurt from talking all day. Her hands were covered in chalk dust. She'd never felt more alive. That night, lying in bed, Clara made plans for the next day. Different approaches for different skill levels. Ways to keep the older boys engaged. Books Lucy could practice with. She fell asleep with her notebook in her hand, pencil marks smudged across her fingers. She didn't hear the knock on her door until it came a third time, louder and more insistent. Clara stumbled out of bed, disoriented. The room was dark except for moonlight through the window. She opened the door to find Margaret standing there, lamplight making harsh shadows on her face. "Get dressed," Margaret said. "There's trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that means you need to come with me. Now." Clara pulled on her dress with shaking hands, her mind racing through possibilities. Had something happened at the school? Had one of the students been hurt? She followed Margaret down the stairs and out into the freezing night. A crowd had gathered near the general store, lamplight illuminating worried faces. Samuel Turner pushed through the crowd when he saw them. His face was pale. "It's Eli," he said. "He's missing. Been gone since this afternoon. We've searched everywhere, but—" His voice broke. "It's almost midnight. In this cold." Clara's stomach dropped. Missing, in the cold, just like she'd been. "We need to organize search parties," she said, the words coming automatically. "Cover different areas. Who knows the terrain best?" "Rowan Mercer," someone said. "But he's 3 miles out." "Then someone ride and get him." Clara turned to Samuel. "Where was Eli last seen?" "Leaving school. He said he was going to check the trap line on the North Ridge." "Alone?" "He always goes alone." Clara wanted to scream. What kind of parent let their 16-year-old son check trap lines alone in winter? But anger wouldn't help find Eli. "We need more light," she said, "and warm blankets for when we find him. And, Miss Whitmore?" Samuel's voice was gentle but firm. "You don't need to organize this. We've done search parties before." "Then why are you all standing here talking instead of searching?" No one had an answer for that. Clara grabbed a lantern from someone's hand and started walking toward the North Ridge. Behind her, she heard Margaret curse, then footsteps as people hurried to follow. They were going to find Eli Turner. They had to. Because if they didn't, Clara's first day of teaching would also be the day one of her students died in the wilderness, and she'd never forgive herself for that. The North Ridge was a nightmare of ice and broken rock, treacherous even in daylight. By lamplight, it was damn near suicide. Clara's boots slipped on frozen stones as she climbed, one hand gripping the lantern, the other reaching for whatever purchase she could find. Behind her, she could hear Samuel Turner breathing hard, and Margaret cursing steadily under her breath. "Eli!" Clara shouted into the darkness. "Eli Turner!" Her voice disappeared into the wind. No answer came back. They'd been searching for 20 minutes when hoofbeats thundered up the trail below. Clara turned to see Rowan dismounting before his horse had fully stopped, another lantern already in his hand. "Where?" he called up to them. "Northridge trapline," Samuel shouted back. "He's been gone since afternoon." Rowan's face went hard. "That trapline runs 3 miles. Could be anywhere." "Then we cover all 3 miles," Clara said. Rowan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You can barely stand on flat ground, Miss Whitmore. This terrain will kill you." "Then I'll die searching. Better than standing around doing nothing." For a moment, Rowan just stared at her. Then, inexplicably, he smiled, quick and fierce. "All right, but you stay with me. Samuel, take the western edge. Margaret, circle back and organize more lanterns. We need light if we're going to do this right." Margaret opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She headed back down the ridge, moving faster than Clara would have thought possible for a woman her age. Rowan started up the trail, not waiting to see if Clara would follow. She did, struggling to keep pace. Her lungs burned, her legs shook. But Eli was out here somewhere, probably hurt, definitely freezing, and she'd be damned if she'd let another person die in the cold while she did nothing. "Tell me about this trapline," she said between gasps for air. "Runs along the ridge, drops down into a gully, follows the creek bed for about a mile," Rowan said without slowing. "Eli's been running it since he was 12. Knows it better than anyone." "Then why hasn't he come back?" "Because he's hurt. Or stuck. Or—" Rowan cut himself off. "Or what?" "Or he fell." Clara's stomach turned over. The ridge dropped off sharply on the eastern side, a 30-foot plunge onto rocks and ice. If Eli had fallen there, if he'd been lying at the bottom for hours— "He's smart," she said, more to herself than to Rowan. "He wouldn't take stupid risks. Smart doesn't mean invincible. And 16-year-old boys think they're immortal." Rowan stopped, held up his lantern. "There, see that?" Clara followed his gaze. A trap, sprung but empty, swinging slightly in the wind. "He was here," Rowan said. "Recently. That trap's still moving." They pressed forward, following the line of traps. 2 more, both empty. Then a 4th that was missing entirely, torn free from its anchor. "Something big pulled that loose," Rowan said, kneeling to examine the broken chain. "Bear, maybe. Or a mountain lion." Would Eli go after it? If he thought he could salvage the trap? Yeah, kid's got more guts than sense. Rowan stood, scanning the darkness. "The question is which way he went." Clara turned in a slow circle, lantern held high, trying to think like a 16-year-old boy tracking a predator. The ground was frozen hard, no tracks visible. But there— "Blood," she said, pointing to dark spots on the snow. Rowan moved to examine them, his face grim. Not human. Too much of it, wrong color. Whatever took that trap is injured. So Eli's following a wounded animal in the dark. Looks like it. They tracked the blood trail deeper into the gully. The temperature dropped as they descended, cold air settling in the low places like water. Clara's breath came out in white clouds. Her fingers were going numb despite her gloves. "Eli!" Rowan's voice boomed across the gully. "Eli Turner, if you can hear me, make some noise." Nothing. They kept walking, following blood drops that were getting harder to see. Clara's lantern was burning low. Soon they'd be in complete darkness. Then she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it, somewhere between a groan and a word. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Rowan had already changed direction, moving toward the sound. Clara followed, her heart hammering. Please let him be alive. Please let him be whole. They found Eli wedged between 2 boulders at the bottom of a slope, his leg bent at an angle that made Clara's stomach lurch. His face was white, his lips blue, but his eyes were open. "Took you long enough," he said through chattering teeth. Rowan was already kneeling beside him, checking for other injuries. What the hell were you thinking, following a wounded bear in the dark? Wasn't dark when I started, and it wasn't a bear, mountain lion. Eli tried to shift, gasped in pain. Trap caught its paw. It ran. I followed. Didn't see the ice until I was sliding. How long have you been here? Don't know. Hours. Eli's eyes found Clara. You're going to say I told you so, aren't you? About what? This morning, I said you'd quit before winter. Figured you'd prove me right tonight. Let the stupid boy who mouthed off freeze to death. That's the dumbest thing you've said all day, Clara said, and you've said a lot of dumb things. Despite everything, Eli laughed. It came out weak and pained, but it was there. Rowan was examining the broken leg with careful hands. It's bad, probably fractured in 2 places. We need to splint it before we move him. With what? Clara looked around. Nothing but rocks and ice. My rifle. Rowan unslung the Winchester from his back, started unbuckling his belt. Miss Whitmore, I need your petticoat. Clara stared at him. My what? Your petticoat. We need fabric to bind the splint. She felt her face heat despite the cold. I can't just... Either you give me the petticoat or this kid loses his leg to gangrene. Your choice. Clara turned away, reached under her skirt, and tore at the strings holding her petticoat in place. The fabric came away in a rush of cotton and lace. She handed it to Rowan without meeting his eyes, face burning. Thank you, he said quietly, already tearing the fabric into strips. While Rowan worked on the splint, Clara knelt beside Eli's head, trying to keep him talking. Tell me about the mountain lion. Big one. Maybe 150 pounds. Eli's words were slurring slightly. Female. Probably has cubs nearby. That's why she didn't run far. You're insane for tracking her. Pa needs that trap. Costs $3. Your father would rather have you than a trap. You don't know my father. Eli's eyes were drifting closed. Hey. Clara grabbed his face, made him look at her. Stay awake. That's an order. Can't order me around, not in school anymore. You're still my student. That means you do what I say. Bossy, Eli muttered, but his eyes stayed open. Rowan finished the splint, tested it gently. Eli went white, but didn't cry out. We need to move him before hypothermia sets in worse than it already has. Miss Whitmore, go back up the trail. There should be more search parties by now. Bring help and blankets. I'm not leaving you alone with him. I can handle... If his leg gets worse, you'll need someone to run for help while you stay with him. If something else goes wrong, 2 people are better than 1. I'm staying. Rowan looked like he wanted to argue, but Eli chose that moment to start shivering violently. They were out of time. Fine, but when this is over, we're having a discussion about you following orders. Looking forward to it. Together, they maneuvered Eli out from between the boulders. Every movement made him gasp, but he bit down on his own sleeve and didn't scream. Clara had to admire that. Stupid as he'd been tonight, the kid had steel in him. Getting him up the slope was worse. Rowan carried most of Eli's weight, but Clara had to support his splinted leg, trying to keep it stable while navigating ice and rocks in the dark. Twice she slipped, nearly sending all 3 of them tumbling back down. Twice Rowan caught her with his free hand, steadied her, kept moving. They were halfway up when they saw lanterns converging on their position. Samuel Turner reached them first, his face collapsing with relief when he saw his son. You found him. Thank... His voice broke. He's got a broken leg, Rowan said. Needs a doctor. You got one in this town? Closest one's in Laramie. 2 days' ride. Then we said it ourselves. Rowan shifted Eli's weight. Samuel, get blankets. As many as you can carry. Miss Whitmore, you're done. Go back to the boarding house before you collapse. Clara wanted to argue, but her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. Margaret appeared at her elbow, took her arm. Come on, the older woman said. You did your part. Let the men finish. They walked back to town in a cluster of lamplight and worried voices. Clara's mind was numb, her body operating on pure momentum. She barely registered climbing the stairs to her room, barely felt Margaret helping her out of her wet clothes and into a nightgown. Sleep, Margaret ordered. You're no good to anyone dead on your feet. Clara slept, but her dreams were full of cold and darkness, searching for someone she couldn't find, calling names that disappeared into wind. She woke to gray morning light and the sound of voices downstairs. Her body ached everywhere. Her hands were blistered from gripping the lantern. When she tried to stand, her legs nearly gave out, but she forced herself up, dressed, made her way downstairs. The boarding house common room was packed. Every seat taken, people standing against the walls. Clara recognized most of them from yesterday, parents of her students, members of the search party, townspeople she'd only seen in passing. The conversation died when they saw her. "Miss Whitmore," Samuel Turner said, standing. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his voice was steady. "Eli's asking for you." Clara's heart jumped. "Is he alive?" "Legs set, though the doc from Laramie will need to look at it when he gets here next month. But alive." Samuel's throat worked. "Because of you. You organized that search. You found him. Rowan found him. Rowan tracked the blood trail, but you're the one who heard him call out." Samuel moved closer, and Clara saw tears on his cheeks. "You saved my son's life, Miss Whitmore. I won't forget that." "Neither will we," someone else said. Clara turned to see Henry Walsh standing near the door. "Word's spreading about what you did last night. A lot of folks had doubts about hiring a woman teacher, a city girl. But you proved something out there." "I didn't prove anything," Clara said. "I just did what anyone would do." "That's where you're wrong." Margaret stepped forward. "Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have stayed inside where it was safe. Let the men handle it. But you didn't." Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just stood there, uncomfortable with the attention, wanting to check on Eli and escape all these eyes watching her. "Where is he?" she asked Samuel. "The store. Upstairs. I'll take you." They walked through morning quiet streets, past the schoolhouse, where Clara should have been preparing for her second day of teaching. Samuel led her up a narrow staircase behind the general store to a small apartment that smelled like wood smoke and coffee. Eli was in bed, his splinted leg propped on pillows. He looked terrible, pale and exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. But he grinned when he saw Clara. "Come to collect on that favor I owe you?" he asked. "I came to make sure you're alive." "Disappointed?" "Relieved, though I'm reconsidering after that comment." Clara pulled a chair over, sat down beside the bed. "How do you feel?" "Like I fell down a mountain and broke my leg." "Accurate assessment." Eli's grin faded. "I'm sorry. About yesterday. What I said about you quitting. I was being an ass then." "Yes, you were. I do that sometimes. Say things I don't mean because I think it makes me sound tough." He picked at the blanket. "Truth is, I was scared you'd actually be a good teacher, that you'd make me want to learn again. And if I wanted to learn, I'd have to admit I've wasted 3 years convincing myself I didn't need school." Clara understood that better than she wanted to admit. How much easier it was to pretend you didn't want something than to risk failing at it. "Well," she said, "you're going to have plenty of time to think about that while your leg heals. How long did your father say you'd be laid up?" 6 weeks? Maybe 8? "Plenty of time for lessons, then." Eli's eyes widened. "You're going to teach me while I'm stuck in bed?" "Unless you'd rather spend 2 months staring at the ceiling." "You don't have to do that." "I know, but you're still my student, and I don't give up on my students." Clara stood. "I'll come by after school lets out. We'll start with mathematics since you said you need it for the store." "Miss Whitmore?" Eli's voice stopped her at the door. "Thank you. For coming after me. For not leaving me out there." Anyone would have. No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have waited for the men to organize a proper search party. You just started walking. He met her eyes. That took guts. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and left. Outside, she found Rowan waiting beside his wagon. He looked like he hadn't slept, still wearing the same clothes from last night, dirt and blood on his shirt. Exhaustion written in every line of his face. "You look terrible," Clara said. "So do you." "Fair point." She leaned against the wagon, suddenly too tired to stand. "Thank you for last night. I couldn't have found him without you. You'd have tried anyway. Probably would have gotten yourself killed, but you'd have tried." "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "It's supposed to be the truth." Rowan climbed into the wagon, then paused. "You're tougher than I gave you credit for, Miss Whitmore." "Clara." "What?" "My name is Clara. You saved my life, helped me find Eli, and saw my petticoat. I think we're past formalities." Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "All right, Clara." He said her name carefully, like he was testing how it felt. "Get some rest. You've got school this afternoon." "I'm canceling school today." "Why? Because you're tired?" "Because half my students were up all night searching. They need rest more than they need lessons." Rowan nodded slowly. "Smart. But tomorrow, you teach. No excuses." "Wouldn't dream of it." He drove away, and Clara walked slowly back to the boarding house. Her whole body ached. Her feet hurt. She probably looked like death warmed over. But there was something else, too. A warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the morning sun. She'd done it. She'd actually done something that mattered. Margaret was waiting when she returned, a plate of food already on the table. "Eat, then sleep. You're no good to anyone running on fumes." Clara ate mechanically. Eggs, bacon, bread she barely tasted. When she finished, Margaret shooed her upstairs like a child. But Clara didn't sleep. Instead, she sat at the small desk in her room and wrote lesson plans for the rest of the week. Mathematics for Eli, reading for Lucy, animal husbandry for Tom. She wrote until her hand cramped, until the words blurred on the page. She wrote because it was easier than thinking about what had almost happened last night. How close Eli had come to dying. How easily it could have been one of the other students. How fragile everything was out here. How quickly disaster could strike. By the time she set down her pencil, the sun was high and her eyes were burning. She lay down on the bed just for a moment. She woke to darkness and someone knocking on her door. Clara stumbled up, disoriented. How long had she slept? The room was pitch black, the house quiet. "Clara?" Margaret's voice, urgent. "You need to come downstairs." Clara threw on her robe and hurried down, her heart pounding. Another emergency? Another missing student? But the common room was full of people again. Not worried faces this time, but something else. They were smiling. "What's going on?" Clara asked. Porter stepped forward, the school board chairman, with something bundled in his arms. "The town took a vote. We wanted to do something to thank you for what you did last night." He handed her the bundle. Clara unfolded it to find a thick wool coat lined with fur, with proper buttons and deep pockets. The kind of coat that could keep someone alive in a Wyoming winter. "We all contributed," Walsh said. "Figured you needed a proper coat if you're going to keep doing crazy things like searching for students in blizzards." Clara couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up. "And there's this," Turner added, passing her a small leather pouch. She opened it to find money, more than she'd make in a month of teaching. "For the school," he explained. "Supplies, books, whatever you need. We haven't invested in the school proper in years. Figured it was past time." Clara looked around the room at all these faces, people who doubted her, judged her, waited for her to fail. And now they were standing here, giving her gifts, thanking her. "I don't know what to say," she managed. "Say you'll stay," Margaret said quietly. "Past winter. Past whatever else comes. We need a teacher who gives a damn. Who'll run into the dark after our children instead of waiting to see if they come back on their own." Clara thought about Boston. About her father's house with its servants and certainty. About the life she could have had. Comfortable, predictable, small. "I'll stay," she said. The room erupted in applause and conversation. People came forward to shake her hand, to thank her again, to tell her about their children and what they hoped she'd teach them. Clara smiled and nodded and tried not to cry. When everyone had finally left and the boarding house was quiet again, Margaret made tea and they sat together in the kitchen. "You did a good thing tonight," Margaret said. "Gave them hope. They've lost a lot in this town. People, livestock, whole seasons of crops. Having someone fight for them instead of giving up? That matters. I just did what felt right. That's what makes it matter." Margaret sipped her tea. "Most people don't do what's right when it's hard. They do what's easy. You're not most people." Clara wrapped her hands around her own cup, feeling the warmth seep into her palms. "I'm scared I'll disappoint them." "You probably will sometimes. Nobody's perfect." Margaret's eyes were kind. "But I don't think you'll quit. And out here, that's more than half the battle." That night, Clara lay in bed wearing her new coat, too tired to take it off. She thought about Eli recovering upstairs at the store, about the children who'd be back in school tomorrow, about Rowan driving home to his empty ranch, about everything she'd already survived and everything still waiting ahead. The frontier hadn't broken her yet, and she was starting to believe it never would. The next morning, 16 students showed up for school. Lucy Peterson brought Clara a flower pressed between pages of a book. The Peterson twins actually sat still during reading. Sarah spoke for the first time, asking a question about grammar. Even Jake Crawford and Tom Walsh seemed different, less hostile, more curious. "Heard you pulled Eli out of the gully yourself," Jake said during lunch. "That true?" Rowan Mercer did most of the work. "But you went looking when everyone else was still standing around talking." Tom studied her with new eyes. "My pa said you've got more spine than sense. Sounds like something your father would say." "He meant it as a compliment." Clara smiled. "Then I'll take it as one." The days began to blur into routine. Teaching, lesson planning, visiting Eli in the afternoons. He turned out to be a quick study. Mathematics came easily to him, and he absorbed information like a sponge finally allowed to drink. "Why'd you quit in the first place?" Clara asked him one afternoon while he worked through accounting problems. "Told you, Pa needed help at the store." "That's the excuse. What's the real reason?" Eli was quiet for a long time. Finally, "Because Miss Brennan died and nobody came to replace her for a year. And when they finally found someone, she took one look at this town and got back on the stagecoach. Same thing happened with the next one. After a while, it felt pointless to wait for a teacher who'd actually stay." "I'm staying." "Yeah." Eli looked up from his work. "I'm starting to believe that." 2 weeks after the rescue, a massive storm rolled in from the north. The kind Rowan had warned her about, the kind that could bury a town for days. Clara dismissed school early, sending students home while they could still make it safely. She was closing up the schoolhouse when Rowan's wagon appeared. "Storm's going to be bad," he said. "You should come to the ranch. It's built stronger than the boarding house." "I can't just leave." "Yes, you can. Margaret's coming too, and the Hastings family. Anyone with sense is either hunkering down in the strongest building they've got or heading to someone else's." Clara looked at the sky. It was gray-black, heavy with snow that hadn't started falling yet, but would soon. "How long?" she asked. "Could be days. Could be a week." A week trapped at Rowan's ranch. The thought should have made her uncomfortable. Instead, she felt something else, something she wasn't quite ready to name. "All right," she said, "let me get my things." By the time they reached the ranch, snow was falling thick and fast. Rowan helped Clara down from the wagon, his hands steady on her waist, his eyes holding hers for just a moment longer than necessary. Inside, Margaret was already organizing, assigning sleeping spaces, taking inventory of food supplies. The Hastings family huddled near the fire. "Going to be a long few days," Margaret said. "Might as well get comfortable." But comfortable was the last thing Clara felt. Because every time she looked at Rowan across the room, every time their eyes met, she felt something shift between them. Something that had been building since the night he'd found her freezing beside the road. Something that terrified her almost as much as the storm howling outside. The storm hit just after dark, transforming the world outside into a wall of white noise and violence. Wind screamed around the ranch house, rattling windows, finding every crack and gap in the walls. Snow piled against the door so fast Clara could watch it climb higher. Inside, Rowan moved through the house like a man preparing for siege, checking the stove, securing shutters, stacking firewood within easy reach. Margaret helped, her movements efficient and practiced. The Hastings family, a couple with 2 young children, stayed close to the fire, the children's eyes wide with fear. "How bad will it get?" Clara asked Rowan when he passed near her. "Bad enough." He didn't stop moving. "Could last 3 days. Could last 7. Won't know until it's over." 7 days trapped in this house with him. Clara's stomach did something complicated. By the second day, the close quarters were starting to show. The Hastings children were restless and cranky. Margaret snapped at everyone. Even Rowan's usual stoic calm was fraying around the edges. Clara tried to help by organizing lessons for the children, but they were too young for what she usually taught, and too anxious to focus. She ended up telling them stories instead, making up wild tales about frontier heroes and talking animals, anything to distract them from the storm. "You're good with them," Rowan said that evening, watching her convince the youngest Hastings child to finally go to sleep. "I'm making it up as I go." "Isn't that what teaching is?" Clara laughed quietly. "Sometimes. Most of the time, actually." They were alone in the main room, everyone else having retreated to sleeping spaces. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside felt almost peaceful. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "You're going to whether I say yes or not. Why did you come to Wyoming? What were you running from?" Rowan was silent for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I wasn't running from something. I was running from someone I used to be." "What does that mean?" He stared into the fire, his face half in shadow. "Before here, I was in Missouri, had a wife, had a farm, had a whole life planned out." His voice was flat, emotionless. "Then the fever came through, took half the county, took her." Clara's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was 6 years ago." But the way he said it made it clear 6 years hadn't been nearly long enough. "After she died, I couldn't stay. Everything reminded me of her, so I sold the farm, came west, started over." "Does it help? Starting over?" "Sometimes. Other times it just means you're lonely in a different place." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "But lately it's been easier." "Why?" "Because you're here." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. "Because for the first time in 6 years, I'm not just surviving, I'm actually living again." Clara couldn't breathe. The air felt too thick, charged with something she didn't have a name for. "Rowan, I know. You're too young, too educated, too everything." He stood, moved toward the door like he needed distance. "You should go back to Boston. Find some banker or lawyer who can give you the life you deserve." "What if I don't want that life?" "Then you're lying to yourself." He turned back to face her. "What kind of future do you have here, Clara? Teaching in a falling-apart schoolhouse in a town that barely exists. Is that really enough for you?" "It's more than I had in Boston." "Is it? Or are you just running from your own version of the past?" The question hit harder than it should have. Was that what she was doing? Running from her father's expectations, from Richard Thornton, from a life that felt like suffocation dressed up as security? "Maybe I am running," she said quietly. "But at least I'm running toward something instead of away from it." "What are you running toward?" "I don't know yet, but it feels like it matters, like I matter." Clara stood, moved closer to him. "In Boston, I was just a pretty ornament, someone's daughter, someone's future wife. Here, I'm actually doing something, teaching children who need it, making a difference, even if it's small." "It's not small," Rowan said. "What you did for Eli, for all those kids, that's bigger than you think." "Then why are you trying to convince me to leave?" "Because I'm selfish." His voice was rough now, raw. "Because every time I look at you, I want things I have no right to want. And I know if you stay, if you keep being brave and stubborn and impossible, I'm going to fall in love with you. And that terrifies me." Clara's heart stopped, then started again too fast. "What if I'm already falling too?" she whispered. The space between them disappeared. She didn't know who moved first, maybe both of them at once. Then his hands were on her face, her fingers were tangled in his shirt, and they were kissing like the storm outside had gotten inside somehow. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't perfect. It was desperate and messy and real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "This is a terrible idea," he said. "Probably. You're 19, I'm 31. I can count. People will talk. Your father will disown you." "He already has, in everything but name." Clara pulled back enough to see his face. "I'm not asking for promises, Rowan. I'm not asking for anything except honesty. Do you want this? Do you want me?" "More than I've wanted anything in 6 years." "Then stop finding reasons why we can't, and just—" He kissed her again, and this time it was slower, deeper, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. They didn't sleep together that night. Not because they didn't want to, but because the house was full of people and there was nowhere private to go. Instead, they sat by the fire talking in low voices until dawn, sharing pieces of themselves they'd kept hidden. Rowan told her about his wife, how they'd met, how she'd laughed, how he'd held her hand while the fever burned through her. Clara told him about her mother who'd died when she was 12, about her father's crushing expectations, about the suffocating cage of Boston society. "I spent my whole life being told what I should want," she said, as gray light filtered through the shutters. "A good marriage? A nice house? Children who'd be raised by nurses while I attended parties and pretended to care about embroidery. And I tried to want it. I really did. But every time I thought about that future, I felt like I was drowning. And now I feel like I can breathe. She looked at him. Even when I'm terrified, even when I'm failing, at least I'm doing it on my own terms. Rowan reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're not failing. I almost lost Eli. But you didn't. You found him, saved him. His hand lingered against her cheek. You're stronger than you think, Clara Whitmore. Tougher than anyone gives you credit for. I learned from the best. Margaret, you. The storm finally broke on the 5th day. Clara woke to silence. No wind, no rattling windows, just the quiet settling of snow. When Rowan opened the door, they found the world buried under 4 feet of white. Going to take days to dig out, he said. Roads won't be passable for a week, maybe more. But people emerged anyway, shoveling paths between buildings, checking on neighbors, sharing supplies. Clara helped where she could, her new coat keeping her warm while she worked alongside townspeople to clear the schoolhouse. Margaret watched her and Rowan together with knowing eyes, but said nothing. The Hastings couple was too grateful for shelter to notice anything unusual, but Clara knew the change between her and Rowan was obvious in the way they moved around each other, the way their eyes met across rooms. You're playing with fire, Margaret said finally, catching Clara alone while they cleared snow from the boarding house steps. I know. Do you? Because this town is small and gossip spreads faster than disease. If people think you're carrying on with Rowan Mercer, let them think what they want. It's not that simple. You're the teacher. They'll hold you to a higher standard than they hold anyone else. Margaret's voice was sharp but not unkind. One whiff of scandal and they'll pull their children faster than you can apologize. So what am I supposed to do? Pretend I don't care about him? I'm saying be careful. Be smart. Margaret's expression softened. I'm not against it, Clara. I think you two might actually be good for each other. But timing matters. And right now, you're still proving yourself to this town. Clara knew she was right. Hated it, but knew it. So she and Rowan kept their distance in public, careful not to give anyone reason to talk. But in private, in stolen moments when he'd drive her back from visiting Eli, or when she'd find excuses to stop by his ranch, they talked and kissed and planned a future they weren't sure they could have. When can we tell people? Clara asked one evening, sitting beside him in his barn while he repaired tack. When you're established enough, they can't take the school away from you. And when will that be? After you've been here a year, maybe 2. He set down the leather he was working on. I know that's not fair. I know it's asking you to wait while I get to just be myself without judgment. It's not your fault the world works that way. Doesn't make it right. Clara thought about that a lot over the following weeks. How Rowan could court her openly and be seen as a respectable rancher making an honest proposal. But if she was seen as too forward, too willing, she'd be branded a loose woman and lose everything she'd built. The unfairness of it burned, but pragmatism won over pride. She'd waited 19 years to find something worth fighting for. She could wait a little longer to fight for it on her terms. Winter deepened. School continued. Eli recovered enough to return on crutches, his leg healing straight thanks to Rowan's careful setting. More children enrolled, word had spread about the teacher who'd run into a blizzard to save a student, and parents who'd been skeptical were now willing to give her a chance. Clara taught reading and mathematics and history, but she also taught practical things, how to write letters, keep accounts, understand contracts, the kind of knowledge these children would actually use. You're changing this place, Rowan said one evening when she told him about her expanded curriculum, making them think bigger than just survival. Survival's important, but it's not enough. Clara looked out at the frozen landscape. These children deserve to dream. Even if those dreams never take them further than Black Hollow, they deserve to know the world is bigger than what they can see. 3 months into teaching, Clara received a letter from her father. She recognized his handwriting on the envelope and almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. The letter was brief and cold. He'd heard through mutual acquaintances that she was still in Wyoming, still teaching. He wanted her to know he'd chosen a date for her wedding to Richard Thornton, June 15th, the following year. She had until then to come to her senses and return home. After that, she would be cut off entirely. No inheritance, no family, nothing. Clara read it twice, then burned it in the stove. "Everything all right?" Margaret asked, watching the paper curl and blacken. "My father gave me an ultimatum. Marry the man he chose or lose everything." "What are you going to do?" "Lose everything, apparently." Clara's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Because I'm not going back." That night she told Rowan about the letter. They were in the barn again. Her excuse was helping him with a sick calf, but really she just needed to see him. "You could still go back," he said quietly. "Marry your banker. Have the life your father wants." "I'd rather die." "Clara, I mean it. I'd rather freeze on that road again than spend one day married to someone I don't love." She moved closer to him. "My father thinks he's punishing me, but he's giving me exactly what I want, freedom from his expectations. Freedom comes with a cost. Everything worth having does." Clara took his hand. "I'm not afraid of being poor. I'm not afraid of hard work. The only thing I'm afraid of is losing this, losing you, losing the life I'm building here." Rowan pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. "You're not going to lose me. Not unless you want to." "Then we're stuck with each other. Sounds terrible, doesn't it?" They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the lamplight, while the calf made soft noises in its pen and the world outside continued turning. Spring came slowly, reluctantly. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown earth and the first brave shoots of grass. Clara's students grew restless with the warmer weather, harder to keep focused when the sun was shining and there was work to be done on family farms. But they kept coming. Even the older boys, who'd initially been there under duress, now showed up voluntarily. Eli had become Clara's unofficial assistant, helping younger students with mathematics while his leg finished healing. "You ever think about becoming a teacher yourself?" Clara asked him one afternoon. "Me? Nah, I'm not smart enough." "You're one of the smartest people I know." Eli looked uncomfortable with the compliment. "Even if I was, who'd hire me? I'm just a store clerk's son." "That's not all you are. You could be more if you wanted to be." "Easy for you to say. You're from Boston. You had opportunities. I had money. That's not the same as opportunities." Clara set down the papers she was grading. "Opportunities are things you make, not things you're given. I made mine by getting on a train west. You could make yours by deciding you're worth more than this town thinks you are." Eli was quiet for a long time. Then, "I'll think about it." It was more than Clara had hoped for. In April, a circuit judge came through Black Hollow. He held court for 3 days, handling disputes and marriages and legal matters. On the third day, Rowan asked Clara to take a walk with him. They ended up at the creek that ran along his property line, swollen with snowmelt and running fast. Rowan had been quiet the whole walk, his hands shoved in his pockets, his face unreadable. "You're scaring me," Clara said finally. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. He stopped, took a breath. "The judge is leaving tomorrow. Won't be back until fall." "So? So if we wanted to get married, we'd have to do it today." Clara's heart stopped. "What? I know it's fast. I know we said we'd wait until you were established. But that letter from your father got me thinking." Rowan turned to face her. "What if something happens? What if there's another storm, another emergency, and I can't be there because I'm not your husband? What if you get sick and I can't make decisions because I have no legal right?" "Rowan, I'm not saying this right." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "What I mean is, I love you. I've loved you since you fell asleep in my wagon that first night, stubborn and half-frozen and too proud to admit you needed help. And I don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to hide what we are because people might talk. I want everyone to know you're mine and I'm yours." Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel the enormity of what he was offering. "If we get married now, the town will talk," she said. "They'll say I'm too young, that I'm making a mistake. They might pull their children from school. They might, or they might accept it and move on. And if they don't, then we figure it out together." Rowan took her hands. "I'm not going to lie and say it'll be easy, but nothing about this place is easy. At least if we're married, we face it together." Clara thought about her father's letter, about the life he'd planned for her, safe, comfortable, suffocating. Then she thought about this life. uncertain, difficult, real. Yes, she said. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, today, right now, before I lose my nerve or remember all the reasons this is insane. Rowan laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy, and kissed her hard enough to make her dizzy. They were married that evening in Margaret's boarding house, with the circuit judge officiating and half the town crammed into the common room. Clara wore the same dress she'd worn teaching that day. Rowan wore his Sunday shirt with the collar she'd helped him mend. There were no flowers, no music, no elaborate ceremony. It was perfect. Samuel Turner stood as witness, tears in his eyes. Eli grinned from the back row, his crutches propped beside him. Lucy Peterson whispered to her mother that Miss Whitmore looked like a princess. "Do you, Clara Elizabeth Whitmore, take this man?" "I do," Clara interrupted, too impatient to wait for the whole question. The judge raised an eyebrow but continued. When it was Rowan's turn, he didn't wait for the question either. "I do." "Well then," the judge smiled, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Rowan did, and the room erupted in applause. Clara expected the backlash to start immediately, expected parents to pull their children, expected whispers and judgment and condemnation. Instead, something strange happened. Nothing. People congratulated them, brought gifts, practical things like preserves and tools and blankets, told them they made a good match. The school board even approached Clara to discuss expanding the schoolhouse, adding a second room, hiring an assistant teacher as enrollment grew. "I don't understand," Clara said to Margaret a week later. "Why isn't anyone angry?" "Because you earned their respect before you married him." Margaret poured tea, her movements calm. "If you'd done this 3 months ago, they'd have crucified you. But you proved yourself first. Proved you were serious about teaching, about staying. The marriage is just confirmation of what they already suspected. That we were courting, that you were committed to each other, to this town, to making something real here." Margaret's eyes were kind. "You're not some flighty city girl running away from her problems anymore, Clara. You're one of us now." The words settled into Clara's chest like warmth. One of us. She belonged somewhere, finally. That summer, Clara taught in a schoolhouse, with a new roof and glass in all the windows. Rowan built shelves for books and proper desks to replace the broken ones. The town donated materials they couldn't afford before: paper, slates, primers, even a globe that showed all the countries Clara told stories about. Eli Turner announced he was going to Denver in the fall to attend a teaching college. He'd saved money from working at the store and had letters of recommendation from Clara and the school board. "You did this," he told Clara. "You made me believe I could be more. You always could be. You just needed to believe it yourself." More students enrolled. 23 by fall. Then 28. Then 32. Children who'd never had regular schooling before. Children from ranches 10 miles out who rode horses to class. Children whose parents had written off education as a luxury they couldn't afford. Clara taught them all. Split them into groups by ability. Created flexible lessons that challenged advanced students while supporting struggling ones. She stayed late helping children who needed extra time. She visited families who couldn't afford school supplies and found creative solutions, trading lessons for materials, organizing donation drives, making do with whatever was available. "You're going to work yourself to death," Rowan said one evening, finding her at the kitchen table grading papers by lamplight. "I'm fine." "You fell asleep during supper." "I was resting my eyes." "Clara." He took the papers from her hands. "You can't save every child in Wyoming territory." "I can try." "At what cost? Your health? Your sanity?" He pulled her to her feet. "You matter too, not just as a teacher, as a person, as my wife." Clara leaned into him, letting herself be held. "I just want to do right by them." "You are. More than you know." Rowan kissed her forehead. "But you have to pace yourself. This is a marathon, not a sprint." She knew he was right. Started setting better boundaries, leaving school by 4, taking Sundays off completely, asking for help when she needed it. Margaret stepped in to assist with younger students. Parents volunteered to maintain the building. The community that had once watched skeptically was now invested in the school's success. In December, a letter arrived from Boston. Clara almost didn't open it, assumed it was another ultimatum from her father. But the handwriting was her sister's. Caroline wrote that their father had suffered a stroke. He was recovering but diminished, no longer the commanding presence he'd been. He'd been asking for Clara. Wanted to see her before he died. "Do you want to go?" Rowan asked after she'd read the letter aloud. "I don't know. Part of me wants him to regret what he did, cutting me off, trying to control my life, but another part—" Clara folded the letter carefully. "He's still my father, and I don't want to regret not saying goodbye. Then we'll go, together." They made the trip in January, a brutal journey across frozen plains and crowded trains. Boston looked exactly as Clara remembered, grand and imposing and utterly foreign, like a city from another life. Her father's house was quieter than she remembered. Servants moved through halls with hushed steps. Caroline met them at the door, older somehow, though only a year had passed. "He's in the library," she said after greeting them. "He wants to see you alone." Clara found her father in his wheelchair by the window, looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. Age and illness had stripped away the authority that had once made him seem invincible. "Clara," his voice was weak but clear. "You came." "Of course I came." He studied her for a long moment. "You look different. Harder. Older." "I am older." "Did you marry that rancher?" "I did." "Are you happy?" Clara hadn't expected the question. "Yes, very." Her father closed his eyes. "I was wrong about you, about what you needed." He opened them again, met her gaze. "I thought I was protecting you, trying to secure your future, but I was just trying to control you because I was afraid of losing you. You lost me anyway." "I know." His hand shook as he reached for hers. "I'm sorry for the ultimatum, for cutting you off, for not trusting you to know your own mind." Clara felt tears on her cheeks. "I'm sorry too, for leaving the way I did, for not trying to make you understand." "You couldn't have made me understand. I wasn't ready to listen." He squeezed her hand weakly. "But I'm listening now. Tell me about your life, about your school, about the man you chose instead of the one I picked." So Clara told him about Black Hollow and the children she taught, about nearly freezing, about finding Eli, about building something real from nothing, about Rowan and the ranch and the life they were creating together. Her father listened to all of it. When she finished, he was crying. "You were right," he said. "You did need to matter, and you do. More than you would have married to some banker, playing at being something you're not." He released her hand. "I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud." Clara stayed in Boston for a week, reconciled with her father, reconnected with Caroline, met her nephew for the first time. But by the end of the week, she was ready to leave, ready to go home. Because Boston wasn't home anymore. Black Hollow was. They returned to Wyoming in early February. The schoolhouse had been maintained in her absence, parents taking turns keeping it clean, Eli teaching basic lessons to the younger children. When Clara walked through the door, the students erupted in cheers. "We thought you might not come back," Lucy said, hugging Clara tight. "Why would I not come back?" "Because Boston's nicer, because it's easier there." Clara knelt down to Lucy's level. "Easier isn't always better, and this is where I belong." Spring came again. Then summer. The school grew. Clara trained 2 assistant teachers, women from nearby towns who'd heard about what she was building and wanted to be part of it. Together they taught over 50 students, the largest school enrollment Black Hollow had ever seen. The town grew too. New families moved in, drawn by the promise of education for their children. A second general store opened. A doctor finally settled permanently instead of just passing through. The saloon got competition from a proper restaurant. "You did this," Rowan said one evening, watching the sun set over the town from their porch. "You turned a dying settlement into a real community." "We did this, all of us together." "No, you started it. You showed them what was possible." Clara thought about the girl who'd been abandoned on a frozen road 2 years ago. Terrified and unprepared and absolutely certain she was going to die. She'd survived by sheer stubborn refusal to give up. That same stubbornness had built everything she had now. "Do you ever miss it?" Rowan asked. "Your old life?" "Never." "Not even a little?" Clara turned to look at him, this man who'd saved her life and then helped her build a new one. Boston gave me education and opportunity, but Wyoming gave me purpose. It gave me you. It gave me a place where I matter not because of who my father is or what family I married into, but because of what I actually do. And what do you do? I teach children who need it. I build community where there wasn't one before. I prove every single day that being young and being a woman doesn't mean you can't change the world. She leaned against him. That's worth more than any inheritance my father could have left me. That fall, Eli returned from Denver with a teaching certificate and a job offer from a school in Laramie. He stopped in Black Hollow on his way there looking older and more confident. "I wanted to thank you," he said to Clara, "for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but it would have taken a lot longer without you." He hesitated. "There's something else. The school in Laramie asked me to help recruit more teachers, young ones like you were, people who will actually stay and build something instead of just passing through." "That's wonderful, Eli." "I told them I learned from the best." He grinned. "They want to know if you'd consider training new teachers here. Make Black Hollow a kind of teaching college for the frontier." Clara's mind raced with possibilities. Training teachers who'd spread across Wyoming and beyond, carrying the same commitment to education she'd brought here. Creating a network of schools that actually served the communities they were in. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." Over the next 5 years, Clara trained 42 teachers. They went to small towns across Wyoming, Montana, Colorado. Some stayed for decades. Others moved on but left better schools behind them. All of them carried the lesson Clara had learned that first brutal winter. Education wasn't about imposing knowledge from above. It was about meeting people where they were and helping them build something better. Black Hollow became known throughout the territory as the town that cared about education. The town that proved frontier communities could be more than just survival. They could be places where children learned and dreamed and grew into people their younger selves wouldn't have imagined. Clara's father died in the spring of her 5th year teaching. He left her half his estate, enough money that she and Rowan could have left Wyoming, bought a mansion somewhere comfortable, lived in luxury. Instead, they used it to build a proper school building with multiple rooms, a library, and housing for traveling teachers. They funded scholarships for students who wanted to attend college. They created a lending library that served families within 50 miles. "Your father would be horrified," Rowan said, watching the new school building go up. "My father would understand," Clara corrected. Eventually, anyway, he learned before he died that forcing people into boxes doesn't work. You have to let them build their own futures. On the 10-year anniversary of the day Clara had nearly frozen on that road, the town threw a celebration. Every student she'd ever taught came back if they could. Eli brought his wife and 2 children. Lucy Peterson had become a teacher herself, working in a school 3 counties over. The Turner twins ran their father's store and credited Clara with teaching them the mathematics that made them successful. "You changed our lives," Samuel Turner said during the speeches. "Not just our children's, all of ours. You taught us to value things beyond survival, to dream bigger than next season's crops." Clara stood to respond, but her throat was too tight. She looked out at all these faces, students and parents and colleagues and friends, people who doubted her, then supported her, then built something alongside her. "I didn't do anything special," she finally managed. "I just refused to quit when things got hard." "That's exactly what made it special," Margaret called out. "Most people quit. You stayed." That night, lying in bed beside Rowan in the house they'd built together, Clara thought about everything that had led her here. The desperation that had driven her from Boston, the terror of that frozen road, the slow, painful process of proving herself to a skeptical town. She thought about the girl she'd been, privileged and naive and absolutely certain she knew what she wanted. She'd been wrong about almost everything, but she'd been right about the most important thing. She'd needed to matter. Not as someone's daughter or someone's wife, but as herself. "Do you have any regrets?" Rowan asked into the darkness. Clara thought about it honestly. "I regret the years with my father we lost. I regret not being there when my sister got married. I regret every student I couldn't reach, every family I couldn't help enough. But I don't regret coming here. I don't regret marrying you. I don't regret building this life." She turned to face him. This was the right choice, even with all the hard parts. Especially with all the hard parts. Why especially? because the hard parts taught me who I actually am. Not who I was supposed to be or who I thought I should be, but who I am when everything's stripped away except what matters most. Rowan pulled her closer. And who is that? Someone stubborn enough to survive. Someone brave enough to keep trying. Someone who'd rather build something real in the wilderness than live a comfortable lie in a city. Clara smiled into the darkness. Someone who knows that mattering isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day and doing the work, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Outside, Wyoming stretched endlessly in all directions, harsh and beautiful and unforgiving. The frontier that had almost killed her had instead made her into someone she actually wanted to be. Clara fell asleep thinking about Monday's lessons, about the new students enrolling in the fall, about the teachers she was training and the schools they'd build. She fell asleep in her own home, beside a man she loved, in a community that valued her. She fell asleep knowing that the girl who'd been left to freeze on a Wyoming road had done more than survive. She'd built a life worth surviving for, and that made all the difference.